These are the voices that don't show up on the usual lists. Bands that didn't top charts, but topped hearts. Groups that lived in smoky clubs, in vinyl crates, in memories whispered from one music lover to another. And one of them, one group at the very end of this list, just might be the best R&B band you've never heard of. But once you do, you'll wonder how they ever slipped past. Let's take a quiet ride back. Number 10, the Five Royales.
This is dedicated to the one I love.
They didn't shout for your attention. They just slipped into your soul and settled in. The Five Royales came out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina in the early 1950s. If you ever caught their record spinning, you know they weren't just another vocal group. They were a full-bodied R&B band, tight as a drum and twice as bold. This was a time when gospel still clung to the corners of popular music. The Five Royales brought it with them, gritty and honest, full of breath and fire.
My baby, and let's tell all those.
But they didn't stop there. They fused gospel urgency with blues guitar licks and the kind of harmonies that felt like church on Saturday night. Their lead guitarist, Loman Pauline, was doing things with 6 strings that would echo for decades. His sharp, rhythmic picking cut through tracks like a sermon through silence. He wasn't flashy, just right. Eric Clapton and Steve Cropper would later call him a key influence, but back then, Loman was just playing what he felt. The Five Royales sang of trouble and tenderness, of aching hearts and second chances, of a world where things didn't always go right, but the music still got you through.
For me, my baby, and let's tell.
Songs like Think and Dedicated to the One I Love would later be covered by bigger names, but the originals hold something raw and real that covers can't quite touch. They were never household names, but they didn't need to be. Because in every note, they carried the weight of Saturday night heartbreak and Sunday morning hope. When you hear them now, it's like opening an old letter, creased at the corners, but full of feeling. Number 9, the Hollywood Flames.
There's the honey from the honeycomb, sweet all the grapes from the vine, but there's no.
They sounded like they were born under neon lights. The Hollywood Flames were a Los Angeles group who first caught ears in the early 1950s, riding that fine line between West Coast doo-wop and street corner R&B. Smooth, layered harmonies were their calling card. But underneath the polish was a rhythm that knew how to move a room. This was the golden age of vocal groups forming under lamplight and dreaming big.
Buzz, buzz, buzz goes the bumblebee, tweedledee goes the bird.
The Flames were part of that world, where kids harmonized on stoops, voices bouncing off brick walls and into the warm night air. But the Flames weren't just voices. They had that something else, a pulse behind the sound that hinted at clubs, not just curbs. Their biggest moment came with Buzz, Buzz, Buzz in 1957, a playful, rhythmic track that hit the national charts. A rare spotlight for a group that mostly stayed in the shadows. But listen deeper, and you'll find a rotating roster of talent running through this group, including Bobby Bird and even a young David Ford. These weren't just singers. They were craftsmen. What made the Hollywood Flames special was how they could blend innocence with grown-up groove.
Well, buzz, buzz, buzz goes the bumblebee, tweedledee goes.
Songs that sounded like smiles with secrets. A saxophone lick here, a wink in the lyrics there. You could slow dance to them or bop with a soda in hand. Either way, they made the room feel a little warmer. They were never the loudest name on the marquee, but they were always the ones people remembered when the night wound down. Sometimes the songs that stay with you weren't the hits. They were the ones that felt like they were meant just for you. Number 8, the Medallions. There was something ghostly and gentle in their sound, like a love letter dropped in the hallway and never picked up. The Medallions came out of Los Angeles in the early 1950s, fronted by a man named Vernon Green. a name that didn't become famous, but sure left a mark. The Medallions weren't the type to chase fame with flash. They sang from the heart, with lyrics that sometimes felt like riddles wrapped in velvet. Vernon had a soft, trembling lead voice, almost dreamlike at times. And in 1954, he gave the world The Letter, a song as strange as it was unforgettable. You might not know it by name, but if you've ever heard someone talk about a Puppetoots of Love, you've brushed up against Green's legacy. That made-up phrase became a mystery for decades. Was it gibberish? A teenage code? Turns out, it was Vernon's way of describing an imaginary girl who could comfort him. Pure, private poetry pressed into vinyl. But the Medallions weren't just lyrical curiosities. Their harmonies were rich, full of space and longing. They knew when to pause, when to breathe. There was elegance in their restraint. Even their upbeat tracks felt like they were gliding just above the ground. They didn't have the machine behind them, no big national tour. But they had moments, small and tender, that still flicker in the memory of anyone who heard them at just the right time. Sometimes, a voice doesn't have to shout to be remembered. It just has to be honest. Number 7, the Five Royales. Now here's a band that lived right on the edge between sacred and sizzling. Not to be confused with other groups from the era, the Five Royales didn't just play R&B. They helped invent what came after it. They were pioneers, even if the world didn't give them the front page treatment. Emerging from gospel roots in the late 1940s, they brought with them a fire that was undeniable.
This is dedicated to the one I love.
They had grit in their chords and grace in their phrasing. By the early 1950s, they were bending the rules, plugging gospel into blues and blues into rhythm with something brand new sparking in the middle. And once again, Loman Pauling, their guitarist and principal songwriter, deserves quiet recognition. His guitar work had bite, but his writing had heart. He gave the group songs that didn't just swing, they spoke. Tracks like Help Me Somebody and Too Much Lovin' felt lived in, like they'd been carried through breakups and back seats. Their music wasn't polished for the charts. It was real, unfiltered.
My baby, and let's tell all those.
You could hear the echo of worn shoes on a dance hall floor. You could feel the tension between Saturday Night Sin and Sunday Morning Redemption. And in that tension, they carved out something honest and lasting. Though they never hit the superstardom of some of their peers, the Five Royales influenced countless acts that followed. You can hear their DNA in James Brown, Otis Redding, even Stax and Motown. Perhaps their greatest legacy is this: they played like they had something to prove, but never anything to hide. That kind of truth doesn't fade with time. Number 6, the Turbans. They came with feathers in their caps and a spark in their step. The Turbans weren't just a vocal group. They were a burst of energy from the streets of Philadelphia, showing up in the mid-1950s with harmonies so tight they felt like they were stitched together by hand. You might remember When You Dance, their breakout hit in 1955. That song swayed like a slow breeze through a high school gym where couples danced close and hope hung thick in the air. But the Turbans were more than one song. They were a feeling. That feeling of teenage dreams and summer pavement under your shoes. What set them apart wasn't just their name or wardrobe. It was their joy. The lead singer, Al Banks, had a voice with bounce and charm. He could lift a note just enough to make it feel like it was smiling. Their backing vocals filled in like trusted friends, steady and true. They didn't chart much after that early success, and the music industry moved fast in those days. One misstep, one missed contract, and you could slip right through. Yet for those who caught them live or wore out that single on the phonograph, the Turbans stayed in the bloodstream of memory. They were the sound of Friday nights and first kisses, of radios turned low and hearts turned high. Sometimes it's not how long a group stays that matters. It's how sweet they sound when they arrive. Number 5, the Falcons. Their sound walked with purpose, like a man heading home late, coat collar up, thinking about everything he never said. The Falcons were born out of Detroit in the mid-1950s. Though they're often overshadowed by the Motown giants that followed, they laid down some of the earliest blueprints for soul. This wasn't polished pop. It was rough around the edges, honest as a scar. Their early lineup included a young Wilson Pickett and, later, Eddie Floyd. Names that would later roar on their own, but here, they were still just boys with voices full of grit and grace. The Falcons' 1959 track, You're So Fine, was a national hit. But it wasn't just the melody. It was the ache in the delivery. The kind of song you'd hear while cleaning up after a party that ended too soon. It had swing, but also sorrow, joy with a shadow behind it. Their harmonies weren't always perfect, but they were true. They sounded like friends who'd been through something together. No theatrics, no sweeteners, just voices a little worn and a little wild, pressing against the silence. And Wilson Pickett? Even then, he had that edge. That rasp like he'd swallowed the blues and kept the fire. His time with the Falcons shaped his future and theirs. You can feel the beginnings of something big in those early recordings, like thunder before the storm. The Falcons never got the gold star treatment, but they left a mark that never really faded. They sang like they meant it, and sometimes that's all it takes to be remembered. Number 4, the Radiants.
Trying hard to forget that you've been cheated.
There's a kind of song that doesn't just play, it sinks into the air, filling every corner like the scent of something familiar. The Radiants were that kind of group. Born in Chicago in the early 1960s, but molded in the gospel heat of the 1950s, they were late arrivals to the R&B scene. But they carried the old spirit with them. Led by the tender, pleading voice of Maurice McAllister, the Radiants had a sound that leaned into the ache. Songs like Voice Your Choice and Ain't No Big Thing carried a quiet intensity.
And from wrong you'll never be free, no use in crying.
Like someone pouring out their heart over a kitchen table late at night. Their gospel background showed, not just in harmonies, but in feeling. There was reverence in how they approached a melody, never rushing, never shouting unless it mattered. And their lyrics, simple, clear, true. They weren't trying to impress, they were trying to connect. You could hear them on a jukebox in a corner bar or floating through an apartment window while someone washed dishes and thought about the one who left. Their songs lived in the little moments. They didn't demand your attention, they earned it.
Wishing you I never met, 'cause you
One remarkable detail, their track Voice Your Choice was one of those rare songs that asked the listener directly to choose between love and longing. Not a plea, just a quiet offer. It's rare for music to be that direct and that gentle at the same time. The Radiants never became chart staples, but they became something more for some listeners. A trusted voice in a noisy world. Even now, their records still sound like someone sitting beside you, saying, I know. Number 3, the $5.
Baby blues, $5, baby.
They came out of Detroit with a name as humble as the pocket full of change. But the $5 packed more soul into a single side of vinyl than most could manage in a whole record. Active during the mid to late 1950s, they were part of that raw, restless wave of groups who didn't wait for permission. They just sang. Their sound had a kind of streetlight shimmer, warm, flickering, and grounded in reality. They weren't chasing big band glitz or studio perfection.
$5, baby blues, $5, baby.
Instead, they sang like guys who knew the corners, knew the long walks home, knew how a heart could crack without breaking wide open. Their 1957 single, Dr. Baby, was full of charm. Playful, pleading, wrapped in harmonies that felt like they'd been practiced in stairwells and back rooms. But beneath the fun was a structure that was tight and clever, guided by singers who knew exactly when to hold a note or lean into a word. They didn't last long. The scene was crowded, and groups came and went like the seasons. But the $5 left behind a few recordings that collectors still treasure, not just because of rarity, but because of truth. There's no artifice in their songs, just stories, melody, and a deep desire to be heard.
Prove them wrong when you get down.
That's what makes them special. They weren't trying to be stars. They were trying to make a record that mattered. Sometimes the most honest music is the kind that barely made it out into the world. If this is bringing back memories, or even introducing you to some long-lost favorites, consider subscribing. It helps keep these stories alive, one soulful voice at a time. Number 2, the Saigons. They didn't leave behind a long list of hits. In fact, the Saigons only recorded a handful of tracks. But what they did leave feels like a page torn from a love letter. This New York-based group existed in the late 1950s, right at the cusp of the doo-wop explosion. They brought with them a sound that was smooth, haunting, and unmistakably heartfelt. Their best-known recording, Don't Cha Baby, released in 1959, is the kind of song that plays softly in the back of your memory. It's not loud, it doesn't beg, it lingers. The harmonies wrap around the lead like a coat in cold weather, gentle, snug, protective. The Saigons never had major distribution. Their music was passed around like secrets, on local airwaves and dusty record shops, from one collector to another. But those who found them held on. One striking detail about the Saigons was how still their music felt. There's no rush in their delivery, no hurry to get to the chorus. They sang like they had all night, and maybe they did. You hear it in the phrasing, in the way the background vocals sway behind the lead. Not pushing, just being there. It's easy to miss a group like this in the history books, but for some listeners, discovering the Saigons feels like opening a window in a forgotten room. A breath of air, a sound you didn't know you needed until it played. There's something beautiful about that, about a band that never got their flowers, but planted seeds anyway. Number 1, the Swallows. If you ever walked past a record store just as a slow tune spilled out onto the sidewalk, you might have heard the Swallows. And even if you didn't know their name, their sound could stop you in your tracks. Formed in Baltimore in the late 1940s, the Swallows were one of the earliest R&B vocal groups to truly marry street corner harmony with emotional depth. Their voices weren't flashy. They didn't chase high notes for the sake of show. Instead, the Swallows sang with a kind of quiet knowing, a calm understanding of how love could both build you up and break you down. Their 1951 hit, Will You Be Mine, is a masterclass in gentle longing. The lead vocal doesn't plead, it asks with honesty and restraint. And the harmonies? They hum beneath like a promise. There's a tenderness in the way each note leans on the next, like a conversation held in the hush of night. But the Swallows were more than just one song, Tracks like Dearest and Since You've Been Away show their emotional range. Sometimes playful, sometimes mournful, always true. Their arrangements were simple, but their delivery made you feel like they'd lived every word. One detail that stays with listeners is the soft vocal tone of Eddie Rich, their lead. He didn't sing to impress, he sang to connect. You could almost see him closing his eyes in the studio, searching for the right way to say what couldn't be said any other way. The Swallows never became a household name, but their music was the kind that people played when the party ended and only the heart was still awake. Sometimes that's when the best songs are found. There's something about the music of the 1950s that lingers. Not because it was loud or polished, but because it meant something. These bands like the Swallows, the Falcons, the Medallions, and so many more might not have had the fame, but they had the feeling. And for those who were lucky enough to hear them when the world was younger, they left a sound that still echoes softly today. These weren't just records. They were companions through first loves, lonely nights, crosstown drives, and quiet mornings. They lived in glove compartments, jukeboxes, and transistor radios. They were passed from friend to friend, sometimes nameless, always cherished. So if you recognized a song tonight or discovered a new favorite you're part of keeping that music alive. Thank you for remembering with us, for listening with the heart, not just the ears. If this kind of storytelling means something to you, we'd be honored if you'd like the video or subscribe to the channel. No pressure, just an open invitation to keep sharing these quiet treasures together. And if you're still feeling the rhythm of these forgotten voices, stay with us. The next video opens the door to the 10 flop R&B songs from the 60s that turned into hits. Another chapter in the story that never truly ends. You'll see it right here on the screen. We'll meet you there when you're ready.